Airport security called me a fake soldier until they saw my prosthetic leg was from an IED blast. I was running late for my connecting flight to Phoenix when the TSA agent at Denver International looked at my military ID and started laughing. Agent Kowalski, according to his badge, held my card up to the light like he was checking a $20 bill for counterfeits. "Nice try, kid, but this thing screams fake from a mile away," he said loud enough for everyone in the security line to hear. "You probably bought this online thinking it would get you through faster." My stomach dropped as other passengers started turning to look at us. I tried explaining that I was Staff Sergeant David Kim, currently on medical leave from Fort Carson, but Kowalski just rolled his eyes and called his supervisor over. "We've got another stolen valor case here," he announced while waving my ID around like evidence. "This one's not even trying to look old enough to have served." Agent Martinez appeared within seconds, a thick woman in her 50s, who took one look at me and shook her head in disgust. "How old are you, son? 22? 23? She studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd caught me red-handed. "You think because you're Asian, we can't tell how young you are? You look like you just graduated high school yesterday." I was actually 28, but I'd always looked younger than my age, which had been a running joke in my unit until the IED blast in Kandahar changed everything about my life. I tried explaining my age and showing them my driver's license to prove it, but Martinez just shook her head and said fake IDs came in sets these days. "Step aside, we're going to need to search you thoroughly," Kowalski ordered, while putting on latex gloves with theatrical precision. And I mean thoroughly, because guys like you usually carry more fake documents or stolen valor gear to sell online. The secondary screening area felt like a fishbowl, with glass walls on 3 sides, so everyone walking by could watch whatever humiliation was about to unfold. Martinez started going through my carry-on bag piece by piece, while Kowalski prepared for what he called a comprehensive pat-down to check for concealed items. They found my prescription bottles first, and Martinez read each label out loud like she was announcing lottery numbers. "Gabapentin for nerve pain, OxyContin for chronic pain, Zoloft for depression," she said, while Kowalski took photos of each bottle with his phone. "Wow, you really went all in on this character, didn't you? Got yourself a whole pharmacy to sell the Wounded Warrior story." That's when other TSA agents started gathering around to watch the show. Agent Thompson, a younger guy who looked like he enjoyed this part of his job too much, started making jokes about how creative the fakers were getting these days. "Next thing you know, they'll be showing up in wheelchairs claiming they lost their legs," he said, while the group laughed. Kowalski started the pat-down, running his hands over my shoulders and down my arms, while explaining to his audience how they trained to spot fake veterans. "Real military guys carry themselves different," he said, while his hands moved down my torso. "They got that bearing, that confidence. This kid's just nervous because he knows he's busted." When his hands reached my legs, I tried to warn him about my prosthetic, but he cut me off. "Save the sob stories for someone who cares," he said, while pressing down on my left thigh. "We've heard every excuse in the book from you stolen valor losers." That's when his fingers hit the metal socket where my prosthetic attached to what was left of my leg. His hand stopped moving completely, and his face went white as he realized what he was feeling. The joking stopped immediately as Martinez looked over from my bag, trying to figure out why Kowalski had frozen mid-search. "Sir," Kowalski said quietly, his voice completely different now. Do you have a prosthetic?" I rolled up my pant leg without saying anything, revealing the titanium and carbon fiber leg that had replaced the flesh and bone I'd lost to an improvised explosive device on a patrol outside Kandahar 18 months ago. The blast had taken my left leg below the knee and left me with nerve damage that would require pain medication for the rest of my life. The silence in that screening area was deafening. Martinez dropped my prescription bottles back into my bag like they'd suddenly become toxic. Thompson stopped laughing and took several steps backward, suddenly very interested in something happening across the terminal. Other TSA agents who'd gathered to watch the show melted away into the crowd. Kowalski's hands were shaking now as he tried to figure out what to say. Your ID looked..." He stumbled over words while sweat started beading on his forehead. "Why didn't you tell us about your injury?" "I tried," I said while rolling my pant leg back down. "You told me to save the sob stories." Martinez was frantically shuffling through paperwork now, probably trying to figure out how to document this colossal screw-up. She kept glancing at me, and then at Kowalski, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and they both knew it. "Sir, we are so sorry," Martinez began, but I cut her off. "Are we done here? I have a flight to catch." They practically threw my belongings back into my bag, while apologizing profusely and asking if there was anything they could do to make this right. Kowalski offered to escort me to my gate personally, which I declined. Martinez said she'd file a report about the incident, though she didn't specify what kind of report. I walked toward my gate trying to process what had just happened, but my hands were shaking and my prosthetic was making clicking sounds because the socket had shifted during the pat-down. The nerve pain in my residual limb was flaring up from the pressure Kowalski had applied, and I could feel phantom pain shooting through the leg that wasn't there anymore. At my gate, I called my wife Sarah to tell her what happened. She was furious and wanted me to file complaints with everyone from the TSA to the Department of Veterans Affairs, but all I wanted was to get home and pretend this day never happened. The flight to Phoenix was delayed by an hour, giving me time to sit in the boarding area and watch other passengers go through security. I spotted Kowalski still working the checkpoint, but now he was being extra polite to everyone, probably paranoid about making another mistake. When boarding finally started, the gate agent called for pre-boarding for passengers with disabilities. I stood up and walked toward the counter, and I could see Kowalski watching me from the security checkpoint. Our eyes met for a second before he looked away quickly. On the plane, I texted my brother Mike about what happened. He immediately called me back, yelling so loud that other passengers could probably hear him through my phone. Mike was a lawyer who specialized in discrimination cases, and he wanted to sue everyone involved. "This is a slam dunk case," he kept saying. "They profiled you, humiliated you, and physically assaulted you based on their ignorant assumptions. But I just wanted to forget about it and focus on getting home to start the next phase of my recovery. I was flying to Phoenix to meet with a specialist about a new prosthetic that might reduce my pain levels and improve my mobility. The last thing I needed was to get dragged into a legal battle. The plane landed in Phoenix on time, and I was walking through the terminal when my phone started buzzing with text messages. Apparently, someone had filmed part of my interaction with TSA and posted it on social media. The video showed Kowalski making jokes about fake veterans while patting me down, then his face going white when he discovered my prosthetic. By the time I reached the rental car counter, the video had been shared thousands of times, and news outlets were calling my brother asking for statements. Mike had already been contacted by reporters wanting to know if I was planning to sue the TSA. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room to find my phone exploded with missed calls and messages. The video had gone viral overnight, with millions of views and comments ranging from outraged support to people defending the TSA agents. Someone had identified me by name, and now my personal information was spreading across the internet. Sarah called crying, saying reporters were camped outside our house in Colorado Springs, asking neighbors about my military service. She'd had to take our kids to her mother's house to avoid the media circus. My commanding officer called to ask if I needed the base's public affairs office to handle media requests. I turned on the news and saw my own face staring back at me from the hotel TV. The anchor was discussing the incident while showing clips of the video alongside photos of me in uniform from before my injury. They'd somehow gotten hold of my military records and were describing the IED attack that cost me my leg. The TSA released a statement saying they were investigating the incident and that all agents involved had been placed on administrative leave pending review. They emphasized their commitment to treating all passengers with dignity and respect, especially veterans and disabled travelers. By noon, I'd received calls from 3 different lawyers offering to represent me in lawsuits against the TSA, the Department of Homeland Security, and anyone else who might be liable. Mike was fielding calls from major news networks wanting exclusive interviews. The prosthetic appointment I'd flown to Phoenix for was a disaster. Reporters had somehow found out where I was staying and followed me to the medical center. Security had to escort me through a back entrance while cameras flashed outside. The specialist, Dr. Rodriguez, apologized for the chaos and suggested we reschedule when things calmed down. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call from someone identifying themselves as Agent Patricia Brooks from the TSA's Office of Professional Responsibility. She wanted to interview me about the incident and mentioned that criminal charges might be filed against the agents involved. "Criminal charges for what?" I asked. "Assault under color of authority, civil rights violations, possibly hate crimes if we can prove they targeted you because of your ethnicity or disability status," she explained. "The physical contact during the search could constitute assault since they continued after you tried to explain about your prosthetic." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. They'd physically restrained and searched me based on false assumptions, ignoring my attempts to explain my medical condition. The video evidence made their behavior impossible to deny. Agent Brooks scheduled an interview for the following day and said I could bring a lawyer if I wanted. She also mentioned that the TSA administrator personally wanted to apologize and discuss how to prevent similar incidents in the future. That evening, I finally watched the full video that had started this whole mess. Seeing myself from an outsider's perspective was jarring. I looked exactly like what I was, a young veteran dealing with invisible wounds and visible disability, trying to travel home for medical treatment while being humiliated by people who should have been helping me. The comments section was a war zone. Thousands of people sharing their own stories of being mistreated by TSA, veterans talking about discrimination they'd faced, and others defending the agents for just doing their job. Some comments made me sick to my stomach, with people questioning whether I really served or suggesting I was milking my injury for sympathy. Mike called that night with news that major veterans organizations were rallying behind me. The Disabled American Veterans, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and VFW were all issuing statements condemning my treatment and demanding reforms to TSA procedures. The next morning brought more surreal developments. The governor of Colorado called my hotel room personally to apologize on behalf of the state and invite me to speak at a veterans event. A major prosthetics company offered to provide me with free equipment for life if I'd become a spokesperson. 3 different movie producers left messages about option rights to my story. Agent Brooks's interview took place at the TSA's Phoenix office, with my brother Mike present as my attorney. She was professional but thorough, asking detailed questions about everything that happened from the moment I approached security until I boarded my plane. She showed me additional security footage that hadn't been in the viral video, including audio of Kowalski and Martinez making jokes about fake cripples while reviewing my medical documentation. The footage also captured them placing bets on whether my prescriptions were real or if I was planning to sell them. This goes way beyond a simple mistake, Agent Brooks explained. These agents demonstrated a pattern of bias and misconduct that violates every policy we have about treating passengers with disabilities. She outlined the charges being considered: assault under color of authority, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The penalties could include prison time and lifetime bans from federal employment. Mike asked about administrative remedies, and Agent Brooks mentioned that the TSA was prepared to offer a substantial settlement to avoid a lawsuit. She couldn't give specifics, but hinted at a 7-figure amount plus policy changes to prevent similar incidents. 2 days later, I flew back to Colorado on a different airline to avoid Denver International entirely. The prosthetic specialist had agreed to come to Colorado Springs for my appointment, understanding that traveling had become complicated for me. At home, I found stacks of letters from veterans who'd seen the news coverage. Some shared similar stories of discrimination, others offered support and encouragement. One letter particularly moved me, from a Vietnam veteran who'd been spit on when he came home and said seeing young veterans like me stand up for themselves gave him hope. Sarah and the kids had returned home by then, but the media attention continued. Reporters still called regularly, and someone had created a GoFundMe page without my permission that had raised over $200,000 for my medical expenses and legal costs. A week later, Agent Brooks called with an update. Kowalski and Martinez had been terminated and were facing federal charges. Thompson, who'd made the jokes about fake disabled veterans, was suspended pending further investigation. The TSA administrator wanted to meet with me personally to discuss procedural changes. The meeting took place at TSA headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Administrator Johnson was a career law enforcement officer who seemed genuinely mortified by what had happened. He outlined new training procedures for agents dealing with disabled passengers and medical devices. "What those agents did to you was inexcusable and completely contrary to our values," he said, while presenting me with a formal apology letter. "We're implementing mandatory disability awareness training for all personnel and creating a rapid response protocol for complaints involving veterans or disabled passengers." He also offered the settlement Mike had negotiated, $2.8 million plus guaranteed policy changes, and my input on the new training programs. The money would help cover my ongoing medical expenses and provide security for my family's future, but the personal cost was harder to calculate. I'd become a reluctant public figure, recognized in airports and restaurants by strangers who wanted to discuss my case. Some encounters were positive, with veterans thanking me for highlighting discrimination issues. Others were hostile, with people accusing me of playing the victim or trying to get rich off my military service. The criminal trial for Kowalski and Martinez took place 8 months later. I testified about the humiliation and physical pain they'd caused, while their defense attorneys argued they were following standard procedures and couldn't have known about my prosthetic. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted both agents on all charges after deliberating for less than 4 hours. Kowalski received 18 months in federal prison, plus 2 years probation. Martinez got 12 months plus probation. Both were banned from federal employment for life. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how I felt about the verdict. I said I hoped it would prevent other veterans from experiencing what I went through, but that no amount of justice could undo the damage to my trust in the systems I'd served to protect. The TSA implemented the policy changes as promised, including specialized training for agents and a confidential hotline for discrimination complaints. They invited me to speak at training sessions, sharing my story to help agents understand the human impact of their actions. A year later, I received a letter from a young Marine who'd lost both legs in Afghanistan. He'd been traveling through Denver International when TSA agents, remembering my case, went out of their way to treat him with respect and dignity. He thanked me for making his journey easier by enduring mine publicly. Mike used part of the settlement to establish a foundation, providing legal support for veterans facing discrimination. We've helped dozens of cases involving everything from employment discrimination to housing issues, turning my nightmare into something that could help others. I still travel regularly for medical appointments and speaking engagements, but I always carry extra documentation now and arrive at airports with plenty of time for potential delays. The clicking sound my prosthetic makes going through metal detectors still draws stares, but most TSA agents I encounter now are professional and respectful. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that passenger hadn't recorded the incident, if the video hadn't gone viral, if I'd just accepted the humiliation and moved on. Probably nothing would have changed, and other veterans would continue facing the same discrimination I experienced. The settlement money helped, but it couldn't restore my faith in institutions or erase the memory of being treated like a criminal for the crime of being a disabled veteran. What it did do was provide resources to fight back and help others, turning a moment of powerlessness into a platform for change that continues protecting veterans who serve their country only to find their country doesn't always serve them back.